Hello, Pam. I am so excited to be speaking to you today. The Arabian Stargazer are stoked to have all their questions answered. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of exciting questions for you today.
Thank you for inviting me, Diana. I'm looking forward to the questions.
Just a little bit of introduction. Pam is a United States Air Force officer and a former NASA astronaut. You served as a pilot and a commander for the space shuttle for NASA, and you are now the director for space technology and policy at Nova Systems. Exciting resume.
Well, I've had a lot of fun in my career in the Air Force, at NASA, and afterwards too.
Yes, and I'm sure there's a lot of challenges and exciting things that you faced throughout your career, and we're excited to learn about all of that today.
Great.
So I'll start with the questions. How about we start with how did you become an astronaut? How was that journey, and how did you start with that career?
Well, I was very inspired 50 years ago by the first landing on the moon. So my whole family, we gathered around the television. My father recorded the audio on a reel-to-reel tape recorder so that we could keep it. I have no idea where that tape went, but we cherished it for a long time. And I was already very interested in astronomy. And so I just found myself thinking, but I want to be an explorer. Part of the reason why I wanted to study astronomy was the idea that maybe I could actually go visit and learn about these planets. And so I was born at exactly the right time. The only astronauts I knew about were military jet test pilots. Mm-hmm. But until I was in high school, women were not actually allowed to be pilots in the Air Force. But then just before I went to university, they opened it up. So in college, I studied astronomy and physics, and I got a master's degree in planetary astronomy. Mm-hmm. And then I went into the Air Force. Now, of course, you don't have to be a military jet test pilot anymore. And in fact, Sally Ride was the first American woman to fly in space, and she was a scientist. But I fell in love with flying and decided to take that route. I also liked the idea that as a pilot, I could command the space shuttle a little bit different. And, so I wanted to do that. And so that was my journey. I went into the Air Force and eventually became a test pilot. And then I was very excited to be selected as an astronaut.
What an exciting journey. Imagine getting that letter that you're now a NASA astronaut and you get to go to space. I'm sure a lot of people would not know the story unless you say it with your own words.
You know, it's interesting. I spent a lot of time thinking about that exact moment because I had been dreaming about it for most of my life. And my picture in my head was that I would get a phone call and then I'd be sitting at my kitchen table.
Yes.
And it was important to me to have someone to share that moment with. And so, yes, I was married. And yes, I was sitting at my kitchen table when I got the phone call. And it was pretty exciting to have my dream come true that way.
And I hope you were sitting with somebody and you were sharing that moment, because it's definitely a surreal moment.
It absolutely was. I wasn't supposed to tell anybody. But I got into the office and everyone looked at my face and said, "You got selected." And I was like,
oh
like, "It's all over your face."
But you didn't say anything, which is good. This is actually a good segue to talk about how you were feeling when you were in space. I want to ask the exact question. What do you think, when you explained the story to me in summer of 2017, when you were leaving to space and when you came back on Earth, and how you felt and your eyes were lighting up when you were speaking about it. And I've never talked to somebody who showed that much passion and that much love towards something they did in their life. And I want to share that same exact way of you explaining going to space to the Arabian Stargazers.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. It was extremely exciting. especially the first time. So you get out to the launch pad, and I'd actually strapped several crews in, so I was very familiar with the procedures. But of course, it's really different when you're going to ride the rocket. Yeah. And in fact, I have to say, as we approached the shuttle, it was sort of like an animal almost, because of all the liquid oxygen that's sort of boiling off. And so there's these sort of clouds and of steam, and it's sort of snorting and popping and crackling a little bit like a live animal. And you get strapped in 2 minutes prior to liftoff. You close your visor, and the only thing you can hear is the sound of your own breath, breathing in and out, breathing in and out. And then at T-minus 6 seconds, the main engines ignite, and the whole shuttle rocked back and forth, and that's called the twang, and it's because the engines are a little bit offset. So at the exact moment that you hit straight upright, the solid rocket boosters light, and away you go. And it was not really like flying an airplane. It was more like having a traffic accident. Oh my God. Because there was so much force pushing you back in the seat. And as we lifted off, it was amazing. I mean, we were going so fast. We were exceeding 100 miles an hour before we cleared the launch tower. And at one point, I saw something blow by the window, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. It looked like a leaf in the wind if you're driving in your car. And then I realized it was a cloud deck, and we had gone so fast, it just whoosh, right past me. Oh my God. And we had taken off about 10 minutes after sunset. But as we rose up into space, we were able to see the sun again. So I got to watch the same sunset twice. Which
That's
was
amazing.
Cool. And there's a lot of noise and vibration, especially for the first 2.5 minutes. And then the solid rocket boosters separate with a giant flash. They come back to the ocean and are recovered. And then we finish the rest of the way on the main engines. And after 8.5 minutes, the engines cut off very suddenly. So you're feeling all this pressure pushing you down in the seat. And then poof, everything starts to float around you. And it's like you've gone to a magic universe. It's amazing. And I think it's quite startling too, because when you come back, you took off from Florida, and when they closed the hatch, you smelled the salt water and the grass and the earth. And then you're in this closed environment for a week or two, a couple of weeks, and you're floating around and you're magic. I mean, it's like you can do anything. You can do as many somersaults as you want. You can lift huge objects with just a finger. And so it seems like almost like a different universe.
Yes.
And then when you land and you open the hatch, you're back in Florida. You smell the grass and you smell the earth, and you think, did I just dream that?
I know. Yeah.
It's a different universe. It's quite different.
It's like a Disneyland, but on different levels of Disneyland. When people are feeling the magic of the rides, and it's like you had a magical ride to space.
Yes, it was indeed.
That's amazing. It does feel like a dream. So when you were in space, what was the weather like in space? Was it sunny all the time? Why is space cold as we read it, since we are in space vacuum? There's no substance or temperature or anything empty. So how does that feel like?
I think the way to think about it is the way temperature is measured is by the energy of the atoms, basically, that are there. So space is indeed a vacuum, and as a result, there's very few atoms. So it's not technically hot or cold. What makes things different is when you insert an object into space. Now, it's still getting radiated by the sun, but in low Earth orbit, which is about 500 kilometers above the Earth, you're going around the Earth every 90 minutes. So as you go around the Earth, half of that is facing the sun, and then on the other side of the Earth, you're blocked by the Earth, so it's night. So every 45 minutes or a sunset. And you're irradiated in the sun, and you're still an object, and all the energy is coming from the sun, and it heats you up. Happened. Then there was this layer has a different kind of rock, or maybe there was a different event. And so you can figure out what order things happened in. It's actually much harder because we don't have as many rocks here on. We can't go to the moon and dig it up and walk around. We haven't been able to do that yet. We don't have all the data that we need. So fortunately, radiological dating is the other method. And basically, you can say at the moment that something was created, it has certain types of radioactive molecules that have a half-life, and they begin to disintegrate. And so by measuring the amount, you can measure how much time from when that rock was formed. It doesn't always help you in, for the moon, and especially for Mars, where we don't really we have a couple of rocks we think might have come from Mars, but we're not sure. So it makes it very hard to measure, but I think it's the same strategy. But we're going to have to send somebody on this podcast to do the stratigraphy, which is going to be even more important.
Yes, definitely. That's awesome. Talking about Mars, why is NASA so interested about going to Mars and not pay attention to other planets like Mercury, for example?
Well, it really has to do with a couple of different things. Why NASA is so interested in Mars. First of all, it's much more similar to the Earth in terms of the technical problems that we have to solve to keep a human alive. They're going to be extremely difficult on Mercury because of the temperatures. Even Venus has a really thick, dense atmosphere, which creates very high atmospheric pressure and very high temperatures at the surface. Mars is cooler than the Earth, but it's kind of reasonable. You could imagine getting enough parkas and sweaters to keep yourself warm. Now, the atmosphere isn't perfect, but it has things that we can work with. You're still going to have to wear a space suit that would keep you warm and allow you to breathe oxygen, but it's more reasonable. I think what's also exciting about Mars is we see evidence of water on Mars at the poles, and we found evidence of water around the surface, just below the surface. So what we think is maybe there might be some form of microbial life on Mars. Maybe even at previous times when there was more water, there was other more advanced forms of life, maybe, amoebas and some more sophisticated animals, probably not anything sentient, we'd probably see that. But learning about biology that forms on another planet, it's the ultimate experiment, right? To compare two different data points with key differences. And so we hope to learn more about life on Earth by finding life on Mars.
And do you think we're going to have enough resources and time to continue space exploration?
Well, it's really a matter of will, right? So the time, I think the only thing we all worry about is whether an asteroid takes out the Earth or not. But I try not to worry about that on a daily basis. I think the resources really have to do with commitments and the will and the understanding of how important space exploration is. I'm excited that right now the U.S. has made a decision to go outside Earth orbit, off a low Earth orbit, back to the moon.
Yes.
And many other countries have expressed interest in partnering. And that will be exciting. Imagine a project much bigger than the International Space Station with many more countries to go out and explore the moon and Mars.
Space for everyone is definitely my goal in life, is to be able to connect everyone with all languages. Even if you don't speak English, even if you don't speak Russian, you'll be able to be part of this huge mission that everyone should be a part of. And I believe that is so because everybody thinks space is valuable, and it's valuable in different ways. What do you think is the value for space?
Well, I can tell you one of the most important things that happens to you in space is to look back at the Earth. So the Earth is not only beautiful and magnificent to look at, you get a very different perspective when you go completely around the Earth in 90 minutes. Every human being, every language, every book, every piece of music, every scientific discovery, every human you could ever meet in your life. And in 90 minutes, you go completely around it. You have a very different perspective when you look at the Earth from space, and you suddenly realize Earth is our spaceship. We are that crew. We have to take care of our spaceship. We have to work together to understand it and to protect each other, just the way a crew works in orbit on a space station or the space shuttle. So for me, there are many, many technical values of space. Learning how to protect ourselves from radiation, learning how to have a fully recycle system so that you can be very water efficient. But really, in the end, it's about the perspective that we gain about one world, one spacecraft, one crew. And I think I'd love it if everyone got the opportunity to see that. I think it would change a lot of the bad things that happen on Earth.
I think so too. And I think so too. One of the questions that were asked also were, are there planets like Earth somewhere else, the abundance of water and other galaxies that humans can actually live in?
It's a very exciting thing to think about. I've been thinking about it since I was at university. And so we have found many, many planets. But the techniques that we use in astronomy to find those planets typically mean they're so far away, they have to be pretty big. So most of the planets we've found are more the size of Jupiter and Saturn. So the really, really big planets with big gas planets and so forth. Now, there have been some recent discoveries of planets that appear to be smaller and still much bigger than the Earth, like in the order of 10 times bigger, I think, is the smallest that's been found. Mm-hmm. But I think it would be very strange to me, statistically speaking, if we were the only planet with oceans and atmosphere. Well, obviously, we're not the only planet with atmosphere. Mars has an atmosphere. And of course, there are oceans also on the moons, some of the moons.
Yeah, the icy moons.
The icy moons, exactly. So I think when you look at that, it's statistically very probable that there are other planets where people can live. The big problem is how far away they are.
And they're very far away, and we don't have a rocket big enough that can take us all the way there. And that goes back to protecting Earth and its resources, and the resources and the fuel that we take from Earth is taking us to space. So there's always these questions and controversial arguments that I get with my followers on why do we go to Earth? Why do we go to space if we need to take care of Earth? Why are we taking resources from Earth to go to space to protect Earth? It's kind of a circular argument.
That's right. I mean, I just look at it and say, yes, we do want to protect the resources of Earth, but at the same time, I think pushing out and exploring is extremely important.
I lost you.
Yeah, I just saw the camera light go out.
I don't know what this is happening.
And we're buffering again.
Okay. Stop video. Start video.
We're buffering.
This is really unfortunate. This did not happen with Dr. Scott. I think Zoom got hacked.
So the question was, are there other planets? Is it possible that there will be resources that will allow us to live? Well, we've discovered lots of planets, actually, but so far we haven't found anything as small as the Earth, mostly those big gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn. But I think it would be very odd if there were not other planets the size of the Earth with oceans and atmospheres. We see that in our own solar system. So I fully expect we'll find them and we'll be able to do it. Unfortunately, they're a very long way away.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a question also about your personal feelings in space, and I want to answer that before we jump into the bigger scope questions. Was there a big change in gravity and microgravity when you were in the space shuttle?
Wow. It's, I talked a little bit about this before, but the sensation of microgravity is really extraordinary. I'd love to see more artists, composers and writers go to space because it's a sensation and a feeling that we just don't actually have the words for yet.
Yes.
You know, we can't, it's very hard to explain. It's super fun. I mean, it is fun to float. It can be quite eerie. If you close your eyes and relax completely, it is almost sensory deprivation, right? If you're just floating and not touching anything. But for me, one of the most wonderful things was to close my eyes, float, and listen to music on headphones, or just float gently and look out at the earth while I was listening to music. That's what I loved to do whenever I had a few minutes to myself, just because that sensation of floating is so extraordinary. And it does make some things more difficult to do,
yes.
like washing your hair and going to the bathroom.
Yes, I've seen all those videos.
But most things are actually more fun in microgravity.
That's awesome. And you talked a little bit about how space smells like, and what about time? Time in space? Is there hours and minutes and seconds like we have on Earth?
It can be very disorienting in space because here on Earth, we're so used to the daily cycles. You have a pretty good sense of what time of day it is. You just, the angle of the sun, it's just very intuitive for you. You kind of have a sense, hey, it's late morning, it's early afternoon, and so forth. But in space, you're going around the Earth every 90 minutes. So every 45 minutes, you get a sunrise or a sunset. That can make it very difficult to tell what time of day it is.
Yes.
In fact, oftentimes, my first clue was my stomach started to growl, and I'm thinking, must be getting close to lunch because I'm very hungry. So there are lots and lots of clocks, as you can imagine. The space station keeps universal time, or GMT. The space shuttle measured time a little differently. They measured it from the moment of liftoff, or mission elapsed time. So most people, when I was flying shuttle mission to the station, I had two watches. One would have mission elapsed time, and then typically in the digital window, I would put the time in Houston, so I would know what my family was doing on the Earth. And then I would have universal time on my other wrist so that I could keep track of what time it was.
Awesome.
But it's very disorienting, actually. You don't have that intuition about what time of day it is at all.
That's fantastic. People on Earth wear an Apple Watch on one hand and a regular analog watch on another hand, and it's for completely different reasons that are not important.
Well, and a lot of people don't wear a watch at all anymore. And they just check their phone.
I don't understand how that is. I have to have my watch.
Me too.
How do you manage between making an impact on the world and enjoying your personal life? I'm actually curious about that too.
Well, I get asked this question a lot, especially the idea of work-life balance. And I'd like to say a couple of things about it. So my view is that we are all born to do and contribute in some way. For me, I wanted to be an astronaut and an explorer, not because it would make me famous, but because it's what I thought was important and I was passionate about. And I love it when I meet people, whether they're a teacher or a doctor, or somebody who repairs things. Just if they're passionate and they love their job and they feel a sense of satisfaction at accomplishing what they went out to do, that's when I feel close to them. Now, it is true that there are some jobs that require and are more demanding, especially as you take on leadership roles. As a leader, you're kind of 24/7, right? If something happens, especially in space, you're the person who has to solve it. And I just have learned if your family loves you, they know who you are better than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And they know that you wouldn't be you if you weren't doing the thing that you love. So I think that's how you really see that balance, is they support you because they know that you're passionate about what you do and you can't imagine doing anything else. Having said that, you always do have to make time for family. So when they talk about work-life balance, there's really no such thing. It's actually just a series of decisions that you make every day about what's important. And do I need to spend time with my family, with my best friend? Yes, I do. So I'm going to prioritize that today. And I may not be able to prioritize it again for a week, but today I will be fully with them. And I think that's a better way of thinking about it, is making smart decisions that are the best for everyone.
Thank you for that. I definitely needed to hear this. My family really know how passionate I am about everything that I am doing, and I had to move away. But it took some time for them to understand that this is what makes me feel content and happy and passionate. And they started being excited to learn about space as well as I go through my journey.
That's wonderful. And that's all you can ask and hope from your family, is that they recognize your passion and they recognize that you're living the life you were meant to live.
Yes.
And they love and support you.
Yes, exactly. So what do you say to somebody who wants to be an astronaut, and especially the majority of the people that are going to be watching this are living in the Middle East, and we have limited resources for space exploration as of now? What advice do you give them?
Well, my advice is going to be the same for everyone who wants to be an astronaut. First of all, it's extremely technical. It's the equipment needed to keep humans alive and to navigate and do other things in space are really require the ability to have reasoning skills around science and engineering. So I think it's very important that you have a skill set. It doesn't matter whether it's mathematics or biology or geology or computer science or being a test pilot like I was, that you just need to have those skills. But there's another skill that's required. Because it is a hostile environment, you depend on each other to support each other and work together effectively. So the standard for teamwork and leadership is very high. So I encourage people to practice the skills, and you can practice leadership. You can practice teamwork. It's by putting yourself in situations, right?
Definitely.
And learning. And you make mistakes, but you learn by doing. So I always encourage people to develop those two skill sets. As far as the broader discussion about countries with, I think it's rarely a matter of resources, it's a matter of priorities. And so, for example, you see the United Arab Emirates has made it a priority. Yes. And that's very exciting to watch. Mm-hmm. And I am so thrilled to see them, that country put resources into it and really understand the value to their country of space. So countries are people. So if you think it's important to go to space, advocate for it.
Yeah.
As you grow older and you rise in your careers and your professions, you have the opportunity to advocate even more powerfully. So it's not just some mysterious someone far away making a decision. You're a part of it.
Yes, the power of one person. And I always say that no matter where you live, you're on Mars, in the United States or in the Middle East, you have the power to make a change, but it takes a while to make that change. And it's always better to have a group of people that believe in the same thing as you, because 10 voices is better than one voice, and you all can collaborate with different ideas and different brains to innovate on something like that. So I think that is the key of this interview today, is the advocacy for something that you believe in is important.
Well, and Diana, you're making a difference with Arabian Stargazer. You're bringing those voices together.
Hopefully bringing those voices together is going to pay off in the future as I grow older and I see maybe there is space exploration all across the Middle East.
I hope so.
There's one question that was very important, and I am going to read it exactly how it was asked. Since what is your feelings being the second woman in the world to command a space shuttle in 2007? What is your explanation of the lack of women participating in projects where among the team of astronauts abroad or among scientists in mission control? Were they women even active in the gigantic project of Apollo, but somehow got shadowed for some strange reason? What do you find any enhancements for the role of women in the field today, or are there way more barriers that we need to overcome in the future?
This is a really important question. There were many women involved in Apollo. There's a famous picture from Mission Control, and it's an ocean of guys in white shirts and ties, and there's one woman in the middle, and that was Joanne Morgan. Yes. And then, of course, people who have seen the movie or read the book Hidden Figures know about Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Vaughan and the other women computers. And there's a book called Rocket Girls, which also talks about the computers at the Jet Propulsion Lab who became computer scientists, the first computer scientists. So there were women. It is a really important question to ask. Why is it so hard to find out information about them? And obviously, that was at a time when history was written differently, and there were people who were really very seriously ambivalent about the idea of women doing technical work, or even more importantly, being astronauts. Even when I was a little girl in the 60s, there were people who said girls should not go to space because it is too dangerous. Mm-hmm. We must protect girls. And fortunately, I think we have come a long way to realize that women and girls are not just to be protected. We protect all of our children equally, but we also nurture them and grow them so that they can live the life they were meant to lead, not based on their gender identity. So we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. We don't have enough women in the STEM fields. I think there can be a lot of discouragement. I often see women who look around and say, well, the guys seem to understand everything, and I'm struggling, and I'm working very hard, and I'm not sure I understand it yet. So here's a tip. They don't understand it any better than you do. It's just the way guys act. They always act like they know what's going on. Yep. So don't pay any attention to anybody else. You ask the question, you learn for yourself. And that's what it's really about, is just not paying any attention to those things, but instead doing your best to learn and do the best that you can. And that was my experience, just to try to not listen to those things and just keep doing what I felt I was born to do.
Thank you, Pam, for that answer. I'm sure there are many females who will be watching this and inspired by your story and your journey, no matter where they live across the world. It inspired me. When I met you in 2017, I marked you as my favorite person in the world. And a few months ago, I wrote a post about who would you love to have coffee with, and that wasn't about who to have coffee with. It was just the philosophical meaning of who would you love to share a conversation with, and it was you. And I posted a selfie of us in the Brooke Owens Fellowship conference.
Yes.
What are your final words to the Arabian Stargazers? What would you like them to leave with after watching this interview?
I love all the things that we've talked about, but to me, Arabian Stargazers is so inspirational of a title. I see us all as humans looking up. Yes. And I feel like I've had the opportunity to share a little bit about what it means to be a human looking down from the stars. And I think that mirror is very important. And I hope that people got a little bit of a sense of what it looks like on both sides.